Hi, I'm Dan Colbert, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Citizens United versus Federal Elections Commission Supreme Court case and the effectiveness of political ads, particularly negative attack ads, on the American electorate. We'll summarize this case, we'll review some of these ads, and we'll hear from experts and non-experts alike on the importance of this landmark Supreme Court ruling and whether or not political ads are actually effective.
Romney campaigned as a job creator.
I know how jobs are created.
But as a corporate raider, he shipped jobs to China and Mexico.
President Obama says he'll move us forward. But where's he taken us so far? America's worst economic recovery ever. Is that really forward or backward?
On leadership and character, Gingrich is no Ronald Reagan.
Rhino Romney is the least electable, with a long history of rejecting conservatism.
Guess what? His wife has actually never worked a day in her life.
And Romney has never gotten her ass out of the house.
Who's behind this ad smearing President Obama? Big oil. That's who. The money they make from high gas prices is going right into Mitt Romney's campaign.
From the day he took office, President Obama launched an apology tour where he appeased America's enemies, undermined our allies, and bowed to foreign leaders. And Obama, at best, seems confused and disengaged.
For every company he drove into the ground, Romney averaged a $92 million profit. Now he says his business experience would make him a good president. If Romney wins, the middle class loses. Priorities USA Action is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Move America Forward Freedom PAC paid for and is responsible for the content of this ad.
Winning Our Future is responsible for the content of this message.
Priorities USA Action is responsible for the content of this advertising.
American Crossroads is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Restore Our Future is responsible for the content of this message.
Did you know that on January 21st, 2010, the Supreme Court ruled that corporations have the same rights as individuals when it comes to free speech? Now that means that corporations now can use their profits to either support or oppose individual candidates. Now, according to the court's decision, money equals speech.
This is a Supreme Court sanctioned murder of what little actual democracy is left in this democracy.
If you are a regular person who's ever made a campaign donation before, forget about ever having to do that again. What's the point?
It is the dark ages. It is our Dred Scott.
Last week, the Supreme Court reversed a century of law that I believe will open the floodgates for special interests, including foreign corporations, to spend without limit in our elections.
Whoa, what's got this trio of patriots so riled up about the end of free speech in America? Ironically, it's a Supreme Court ruling about a political film that was actually censored by the federal government. The Citizens United case revolved around Hillary the Movie, an anti-Hillary Clinton documentary put together by the group Citizens United. Lower courts had ruled that ads for the film or pay-per-view showings violated the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002, which is also known as McCain-Feingold. McCain-Feingold strictly limited what independent groups could say about politicians just before an election, and the Supreme Court ruled that such laws violate the First Amendment. So why is everybody all bent out of shape about big corporations taking over? Well, Citizens United is a type of corporation. It's a 501c4 nonprofit. And the Supreme Court ruled that groups of individuals who come together should have the right to make their political views known before an election, as long as they're not coordinating with another political campaign.
The ads were extremely negative this year. They're as negative as I've ever seen them. And the political science scholarship basically shows that negative ads can work, particularly if people don't feel especially attracted to either one of the candidates.
The question is, do these ads actually work? Well, it's much easier to stop major reform than it is to start it, and so negative advertisements seem to be a little bit more effective in these kinds of debates, as well as in just regular old elections, in terms of getting people excited about stopping something from happening.
Attack advertising is very interesting, and it reminds me very much of the 405 freeway. And what I mean by that is that nothing frustrates people more than when you're driving on the freeway and there's a backup and you come to realize that it's because everyone has slowed down to look at an accident, a car crash, on the other side of the freeway, not even on your side. And yet, if we went out right now into Westwood and asked 100 people, do you like to slow down to gawk at car crashes? People would say no. Every single person would say no. And attack advertising is a little bit like that. You ask people, are you fed up with these attack ads? Everybody says, yes, I hate them. I don't want to turn on my television. But the fact of the matter is that we know that attack advertising generates interest in campaigns. Attack ads, compared to promotional ads, contain more issue information. People learn more about the candidates from attack advertising. So we can hate them all we want, but they actually serve a very important purpose.
Why is it that politicians are allowed to lie in their commercials, but Coca-Cola and Pepsi are not? Because of the First Amendment. The notion that the First Amendment's freedom of speech promise is specifically a protection of political speech, and the candidates should be allowed to say whatever they want, because of course their opponents are just as free to rebut them, and all voters are free to rebut them, and fact checkers are free to do their fact checking. So I'm a little frightened of a world in which there would be restrictions on political speech. At the same time, this is the price we pay, right? This is the price we pay for having complete freedom of political speech, that you are free to lie. And at the same time, fact checkers are free to fact check, and candidates are free to rebut. So I think I'd rather have more speech than less. But I think now that we live in an era of more fact checking and it mattering less, I think it really falls more to us as voters to be skeptical and to do our homework. Actually, there's not a lack of fact checking. There's more fact checking than ever. But to quote Romney's pollster, we're not going to run our campaign, in the sway of fact checking. We're not going to let fact checkers dictate our campaign. So they're recognizing that the fact checkers out there, and we don't care. We're going to make the statements we want to. And again, the power of making these outrageous statements, or at least statements that will appeal to your base, to your voters, is that it does do that. It rallies the troops. It gets your campaign talked about. And I think they've made a very calculated decision that in this environment, that's okay. It's worth being called a liar or an exaggerator. That's a small price to pay for the advantage of getting the claim that you want to make out there in the world.
We tend to be a little cynical, even almost condescending about campaign commercials. But in this day and age, those kinds of simple messages are how politicians communicate with voters, and this stuff really matters. The average voter is very busy, doesn't have a whole lot of time to allocate to learning about politics, and so they look around for shortcuts or cues. And this is basically the stuff of representation these days. This is how voters develop views about issues. Although we kind of make fun of campaign commercials, they're vitally important as a way that people communicate with each other, that elites communicate with voters and citizens about issues. I think most of the research that's been done about campaign ads finds that they do make voters more informed about issues and candidates.
So, after hearing from our experts, it seems pretty clear that attack ads and political ads in general are pretty effective. Otherwise, politicians wouldn't still be using them. What is left up for debate, however, is whether or not corporations can spend unlimited amounts of money donating to super PACs to influence this advertising. Some say that it's freedom of speech to spend as much money as you'd like. Some say that it's bad because it can distort messages and the elections overall. However, what I think isn't up for debate and is pretty clear is that voters should take the time out for themselves to research the candidates in order to make an informed decision, one that's free of influence from corporations, their peers, or the media. With a look at the Citizens United versus FEC Supreme Court case and the effectiveness of political ads, I'm Dan Colbert.